The ballroom of the Grand Josian Hotel smelled exactly the way power always did. Cedarwood, barley tea, and the faint alkaline bite of money that hadn't been earned with anyone's hands. Crystal chandeliers threw their light downward in long, generous curtains that made everyone look better than they were. 43 floors above Seoul's Han River, surrounded by chairmen, ministers, and the three most photographed jawlines in South Korean business, the Kwon Group's annual strategy dinner was already running 12 minutes behind schedule. Nobody noticed the woman carrying the canapé tray. They never did. Bola Tunde had learned this about herself a long time ago, not as a wound but as a tool. At 29, she had the kind of stillness that people misread as smallness. She was Nigerian-American, Lagos-born, Chicago-raised, with deep brown skin that the chandelier light turned almost amber, and a way of moving through crowded rooms that suggested she had mapped every exit before she walked through the door. Which she had. She always did. She was not supposed to be thinking about the man at the center table. She was supposed to be thinking about the tray in her hands. Smoked duck on buckwheat crisps, a dish she had helped plate for the last 3 hours in a kitchen that smelled of rendered fat and executive anxiety. But she had been watching him since he walked in, and what she had seen made the hair on the back of her neck do something she did not have a polite name for. Kwon Seojun, 41 years old, CEO of Kwon Group, whose holdings spanned shipping, biotech, and a private equity arm that had, in the last 7 years, quietly restructured 4 of Korea's most vulnerable mid-tier conglomerates. He had a face that photographs described as severe, a straight jaw, a mouth that did not volunteer smiles, and eyes that were the specific gray-brown of deep river water, the kind that looked still until something moved beneath the surface. He was the most controlled person in the room, which was saying something at a table where every man had a PR team. Rooms reorganized themselves around him. She had read that in a magazine profile once, and dismissed it as the breathless hyperbole of a journalist trying to make a CEO sound mythological. Standing 40 feet away with a silver tray, she understood now what the journalist had actually meant. When Kwon Seojun shifted his weight slightly to the left to speak to the deputy minister beside him, 3 other conversations in his orbit paused, recalibrated, resumed at a different frequency. Nobody looked directly at him too long. Nobody touched his shoulder. She was not watching him because of any of that. She was watching him because of the man standing 2 positions behind him. Security detail. Broad shoulders in a dark suit, close-cropped hair. The kind of posture that military service carves into a body permanently. He had been introduced into the room 40 minutes ago as part of the Kwon Group's enhanced protection protocol. She had heard that from the floor manager while she was folding napkins. Private contractor, not regular staff. New tonight. Bola had worked enough high-security events in the 3 years since she'd pivoted from corporate translation to private staffing to know what protection personnel looked like when they were doing their job and what they looked like when they were doing something else. This man's left hand had hovered near the inner left panel of his jacket 3 times in the last 8 minutes. Not the right panel, where a standard shoulder holster would sit. The left inner panel, where a secondary device would go. Where a phone would go if you were relaying position data to someone outside this room. She adjusted the tray in her hands, took 2 steps forward, then 2 more. She was not supposed to approach the primary guest table during the pre-dinner reception. That was the rule. The floor manager, a precise man named Mr. Bay who wore his authority in the form of a wireless earpiece he touched constantly, had been very clear. Appetizer tray circuit, north wall, east wing tables, and the networking cluster near the bar. The center table got attended by the senior waitstaff. She approached the center table anyway. Kwon Seojun was mid-sentence. Something about Q4 projections that the deputy minister beside him was receiving with the strained attention of a man who desperately wanted to agree but needed more time, when Bola materialized at his left elbow. She did not interrupt. She offered the tray. Standard professional gesture, smooth and deferential, the kind of move that takes 3 months to make look effortless. He took a piece without looking up. She leaned 2 centimeters closer than protocol allowed. "The man behind you," she said, her voice pitched low enough that it existed only in the space between them, "has been looking at your phone on the table for the last 4 minutes. Not the way someone looks at a phone. The way someone looks at a target." Pause that had weight to it. He did not look at the phone. He did not look at the man behind him. He looked at her, and she felt the full weight of his attention land on her like a physical thing, a focused, unhurried assessment that lasted no more than 3 seconds but felt like a complete inventory. "Your tray is half empty," he said quietly. "You've been at this table longer than you should be." "I know," she said. "That's on purpose." Another beat. The conversation around them continued its ambient roar. "His name on the staff manifest," Kwon Seojun said, still not moving his eyes from some middle distance, "is Choi Min-soo. He's been with the contractor firm for 6 months. You've worked enough events to notice something my own detail missed. What exactly did you see?" 3 times in 8 minutes, she said. "Left inner panel. Not right. Not a nervous habit, it's a check. Like someone confirming a device is still in position." The deputy minister to his right was now speaking at a pace that suggested he expected Kwon Seojun's attention to return to him at any moment. "Did not stay in my sight line," Kwon Seojun said. Not a request. Not quite an order. Something between the two that she did not have a word for yet. She stepped back, tray repositioned, and returned to her circuit. 3 minutes later, 2 men in plain clothes whom she had not noticed before moved quietly through the room and escorted Choi Min-soo out through the service corridor. No scene. No raised voices. The deputy minister never noticed. Bola finished her circuit of the east wing tables and did not look at the center table again for the rest of the reception. But she felt, with a certainty that had nothing to do with logic, that he did not stop watching her. "If you would have said something, drop a comment right now. Would you have risked it?" She was not expecting a phone call. Bola had been back in her Mapogu apartment for 6 hours, had slept for 4 of them, and was standing in her small kitchen making jollof rice because it was the only thing she cooked when her nervous system needed to discharge. The rice was going to come out wrong. She always forgot to pre-soak the tomatoes properly when she was distracted, and she was trying to decide whether to care about that when her phone rang. Unknown number. Seoul area code. She almost didn't answer. "Ms. Tunde." Not a question. The voice was the same quality it had been the night before. Contained, low, precise. "This is Kwon Seojun." She set down the wooden spoon. Turned off the gas ring. "How did you get this number?" "You're registered with Premier Event Staffing. Their client access system is thorough." "You spotted something trained personnel missed. I'd like to know more about your background." She thought about this. The correct answer, the safe answer, was that she was a contract event staffer who had gotten lucky and he should direct any security concerns to his own team. That answer existed. She could see it from where she was standing. "I have a translation background," she said instead. "Languages mostly Yoruba, Igbo, English, Korean, Intermediate Mandarin. I spent 2 years working conference security intake for a firm in Lagos before I relocated. You learn to read people when your job is deciding who gets through a door." Silence. The kind that was listening, not empty. "The Kwon Group is looking to expand its Lagos and Abuja operations. I need a senior executive assistant, someone who can manage correspondence in 3 languages, navigate both Nigerian and Korean business culture, and who has, apparently, better threat perception than my current private security rotation." Bola looked at her jollof rice. "I work event staffing," she said. "I know. I also know that Premier pays you 62,001 per event, that you work 3 to 4 events per week, and that you have a bachelor's degree in applied linguistics from the University of Illinois and a master's degree in international communications from Yonsei that you finished 18 months ago." Another pause. "The position pays 8 times what you currently earn annually. It requires relocating to the Kwon Group Tower in Gangnam-gu. You would have a private office adjacent to mine." She was quiet for a long time. "Why are you offering this to someone you spoke to for 45 seconds at a dinner party?" The answer came without hesitation. "Because you made a decision that most people in that room would not have made. You could have walked past. You calculated the risk, weighed it against a stranger's safety, and acted. That is not a quality I can train into someone." Beep. I also don't believe it was the first time you've made that kind of calculation. She thought about Lagos, about doors, about the geometry of dangerous rooms. She thought about the 18 months she had been in Seoul, the savings that were always 3 months thinner than they should be, the translation freelance work that came in waves, the event staffing that filled the troughs. She thought about the way he had said stay in my sight line and how her body had understood the instruction before her brain fully processed it. I'll need to review a formal offer in writing before I agree to anything, she said. My legal team will send it within the hour. Another pause, shorter this time. One more thing, Ms. Tunde. What you noticed last night, do not discuss it with anyone. The situation is still active. The call ended. Her jollof rice was salvageable. She salvaged it. She started at Kwon Group on a Thursday. The 44th floor of Kwon Tower smelled like cedarwood and something colder. The ventilated breath of servers running somewhere below, the faint mineral tang of recycled air at altitude. Bola's office was a glass box adjacent to his, separated by a wall that was floor-to-ceiling transparent on her side and frosted on his. She had a view of the Han River from her desk. She had learned in the first week not to look at it too often during work hours because it was distracting in a way that felt indulgent. Her first week was a baptism. 312 emails on day 1. Correspondence in Korean, English, and 2 threads in Mandarin that needed restructuring before they could be forwarded. A call with the Lagos team at 7 a.m. that ran 40 minutes over schedule because the operations director there was navigating a permit issue that nobody on the Seoul side had been told about. A board presentation she had to reformat in 4 hours. A lunch meeting she attended in Kwon Seojun's place because he was unexpectedly detained in a government meeting and she was, according to his chief of staff Han Ji-hun, quote, good enough to cover. She got through it. She got through all of it. And when she submitted her daily summary at 6:45 p.m., she included a 3-point recommendation for restructuring the Lagos correspondence protocol that she had not been asked for. He read it. She knew he read it because at 7:02 p.m. a single message appeared in their internal system. Implement it. No name. No signature. She did not need either. The second week was harder in a different way. Not the workload but the proximity. His office was 10 steps from hers. He arrived every morning at 6:50 a.m., which she knew because she had been arriving at 6:45 to be ahead of the day. He took his coffee black, no sugar, which she had not been asked to know but learned anyway from the pantry assistant who sometimes beat her in. He had a habit of standing at the window that overlooked the river when he was thinking, standing very still with his hands in his pockets, the way a person stands when they're having an argument with themselves they haven't shared with anyone else. She noticed these things the way she noticed everything, methodically, involuntarily, the way her brain had been wired by years of reading rooms. She did not examine what she did with the information. The thing that complicated the second week was the child. On Thursday morning, Kwon Seojun arrived 14 minutes late. Behind him, holding his hand with the grip of someone deeply unimpressed by corporate lobbies, was a boy of approximately 8 with a school backpack and an expression of frank scientific curiosity. He had his father's eyes, that same gray river stillness, and his mother's face, which Bola had seen in the single-framed photograph on the shelf behind Kwon Seojun's desk, taken before a car accident 6 years ago had rearranged the architecture of this family. The boy's name was Juno. He had a school holiday. The regular nanny had a family emergency. The backup nanny was unavailable. This information was delivered to Bola by Han Ji-hun with the energy of a man defusing something, and she understood that she was being asked to absorb a complication that nobody had language for yet. She found Juno a chair at the small meeting table in her office, gave him paper and pens from her desk drawer, and continued her morning without interruption. He drew for 20 minutes. Then he rolled his chair 3 inches toward her desk, watched her type for another 10, and said in the precise, unsentimental Korean of a child who had been raised around adults, "You're not scared of my dad." She finished the sentence she was typing. "No," she said. "Should I be?" He thought about this seriously. "Most people are," he said. "They act strange around him. Like they're holding their breath. People act strange around power," she said. "I've been in rooms with powerful people before. You get used to it. He considered this. Then, my mom wasn't scared of him either. Beep. She kept her face composed. She sounds like she was a smart woman, Bola said. She was. He picked up the red pen. He misses her. He thinks I can't tell, but I can. Bola looked at him. This solemn, precise child with his father's eyes and his dead mother's face, and felt something move in her chest that she was not going to examine right now. I know, she said quietly. He went back to drawing. When Kwon Seojun came to collect him at noon, Juno looked up from his drawing, a surprisingly accurate rendering of the Han River viewed from Bola's window, and said to his father with the casual certainty of someone delivering a verdict. She's safe, Appa. You can trust her. Kwon Seojun looked at his son, then at Bola. Something moved in his face, a fractional shift around his eyes, there and gone in under 2 seconds, the kind of thing you only catch if you've been watching long enough. He said nothing. He collected Juno and left. Bola sat at her desk for 4 minutes after they left, not typing, looking at the Han River. Then she went back to work. Subscribe before we go any further. This story earns it. And tell me, did Juno just change everything? By the end of the first month, Bola had built a system. It was not a system anyone had asked her to build. It emerged the way all good systems do. From necessity, repetition, and the slow accumulation of knowledge about how a particular mind works. Kwon Seojun processed information in a specific way. He absorbed briefings fastest when they were structured in inverted pyramid format, most important point first, supporting context second, risk factors last. He made decisions quickly on things with clear precedent and spent disproportionate time on edge cases that touched human outcomes. He did not like to be interrupted during the first 30 minutes of his morning. He liked to be told bad news directly, without the softening cushion of corporate euphemism. He hated the word leverage when used as a verb. She calibrated her work to these things without discussing it. He noticed without mentioning it. The calibration went both ways. Within 3 weeks, a first aid kit had appeared in her desk drawer. She had mentioned once, in passing, that she sometimes got tension headaches during back-to-back translation sessions. She had not mentioned what she kept for them. The kit contained, among other things, exactly the right brand of ibuprofen. Within 4 weeks, her morning coffee, which she made herself always, because the pantry assistant forgot she took it with condensed milk in the Lagos style, had begun appearing on her desk at 6:47 a.m., made correctly, 2 minutes before she usually got around to making it herself. These things were not discussed. They simply happened, and she catalogued them in the part of her mind that ran parallel to the professional part, and she did not draw conclusions from them because drawing conclusions was a form of permission she had not decided to give herself yet. The distance between them was exactly 3 centimeters of glass and professional architecture. She measured it, metaphorically, with the precision of someone who knows that the distance between safe and not safe is always smaller than it appears. On the last Friday of the month, at 8:40 p.m., when the floor was empty and she was finalizing a contract addendum that had to go to Lagos before their Monday morning, she looked up from her screen and found him standing in the doorway between their offices. Not working. Just standing. Watching her work. She did not startle. "You've been here for 13 hours, he said. "So have you," she said. He came into her office, which he rarely did. Usually they communicated through the internal system or the glass, gestures and headshakes, and the occasional crossed-office conversation at a volume slightly higher than either of them preferred. He sat down in the chair across from her desk, which Juno usually occupied, and crossed his arms in the way that meant he was not going to speak for a moment. She waited. "The Lagos team sent a secondary message," he said. "Through personal channels, not official ones. Director Adeyemi." He stilled. "He's concerned about the permit situation. He thinks there's a specific official in the Ministry of Trade who's been positioned to delay our license approvals. He doesn't know who recommended this official to that position." He paused. "He asked, through back channels, if we have anyone on our staff who understands how those conversations work in Lagos." She understood what she was being asked. "You want me to make a call," she said. "I want to know if you can," he said. Not if you will, if you can. This is outside your job description. She thought about Lagos. About her uncle, who had worked in government logistics for 30 years and knew the pattern of every hand that reached into every pocket. About the phone numbers she had never deleted because you did not delete the numbers of people who once helped your family and might again. I can, she said. I'll need 48 hours. He nodded. Neither of them moved for a beat longer than the conversation required. Go home, he said finally. This will still need doing tomorrow. You should also go home, she said before she'd decided to. The silence that followed had a quality she could not quite name. Juno is with his grandmother tonight, he said. It was not an answer to what she'd said. It was something adjacent to one. She saved her document, shut down her screen, said good night. He was still sitting in the chair when she left, and she resisted, with a deliberateness that took something out of her. The impulse to look back from the doorway. The Lagos call took 31 hours, not 48. Her uncle's contact, a man she had met once at a family event in Lekki who sold himself as a telecommunications consultant and sold everyone around him as everything else, identified the ministry official within a day. His name was Amici. He had been placed in his current position 8 months ago, following a recommendation that originated, circuitously, from a consulting firm based in Busan that had been engaged by a competitor of the Kwon Group's African expansion arm. When she brought this to Kwon Seojun, he read the name of the Busan firm twice. His expression did not change. It almost didn't change, which was different. How credible is your source? Credible enough that he told me this through 2 layers of intermediary and still made me promise not to attach his name to anything written. He paused. He's been right before. My family has reason to trust his information. Beep. The Busan firm, he said. Park Consulting. Do you know who owns it? No. He stood. Walked to his window. The Han River was doing its silver afternoon thing, the surface breaking light into pieces. He stood there for 30 seconds, which for him was a long time. My late wife's brother, he said. Dae-hoon. He runs Park Consulting. Has for 4 years. She waited. After Eun-jin died, he said, still facing the window, her family felt that the accident, He stopped. Restarted. There are those in her family who believe my negligence contributed to her death. Dae-hoon has used that grief as a foundation for a campaign against the group's expansion that has been, until now, difficult to prove. The room was quiet. He loved his sister, Bola said. Yes, Kwon Seojun said. He did. And grief, when it has no clean place to go, finds a direction. She thought about her own family's grief, about her father, who had worked himself into early coronary disease so that she and her sisters could have what he had not, and the particular quality of silence her mother had maintained for 5 years after his death. Grief that has no clean place to go. She understood the phrasing from the inside. What happened, she asked. The night of the accident. He turned from the window. His face had the look of someone who has said a thing so many times internally that the saying of it aloud changes nothing and costs everything. She was driving home from an event. I was supposed to accompany her and I stayed late at a board meeting. She called me 3 times. I didn't pick up. By the time I reached my phone, she was already. He stopped. There was nothing wrong with my response time. There was nothing I could have done. The accident investigation confirmed this. He looked at Bola directly. But Dae-hoon believes that if I had been with her, she would not have been alone on that road at that hour. And I do not know that he is wrong. 3 centimeters. The glass wall between their offices. The professional distance she had been maintaining like a structural load-bearing thing. She said nothing. Some truths don't need a response. They need a witness. He sat back down. Picked up the file. We'll need to handle the ministry situation without exposing your source or the connection to Dae-hoon. Is there a way to displace the official through official channels? Back to work. She understood. She matched him. There's a formal complaint procedure through the FIRS, she said. If the permit delays can be documented as exceeding statutory timelines, we can file without triggering a corruption investigation. It becomes an administrative matter. Quiet. Do that. She did. Took 4 days. The official was reassigned within the month. The permits were approved 6 weeks later. Nobody outside the 44th floor ever knew how. The more she learns about him, the harder it gets to keep the professional distance. You see it coming, don't you? Let me know in the comments. It was Juno who found it. On a Saturday in November, which was Bola's day off but which she had spent at the office anyway because there was a contract review that needed her attention, and she had found, quietly, that the 44th floor was the most peaceful place she knew, Juno arrived with his grandmother, a composed, elegant woman named Madame Kwon, who assessed Bola in approximately the same way her son did, with the same precise silence, and spent an hour in his usual chair while Bola worked. He had been given a photo archive project for school. Korean family history, something about roots. He had brought a box of printed photographs from his grandmother and was sorting through them at the meeting table with the focused seriousness of a very small archivist. "Adisa Sasai," he said. He had his own pronunciation of her name, a soft doubling of the middle syllable that she had stopped correcting. "Who is this?" She crossed to the table. He held up a photograph. Black and white, somewhat faded. 2 men standing in front of a shipping container. One was clearly Korean, mid-40s, the cut of his suit placing the photo in the early 1990s. The other was Nigerian, tall, wearing a dashiki and a wide-brimmed hat, laughing at something outside the frame. She went very still. The laughing man had her father's hands. Her father's way of standing with his weight on his left foot. Her father's particular attitude toward a camera, which was to look past it rather than at it, as though something more interesting was happening just behind the person holding it. "That one is my great-grandfather," Juno said, pointing to the Korean man. "Kwon Seojun. Grandma says he was in the shipping business." Bola picked up the photograph. On the back, in her father's handwriting, she would know it in any language, were 4 words. Busan, 1991. "Good man. She sat down. "What's wrong?" Juno asked. "Nothing," she said. Her voice was steady. "I think I recognize the other man. In the photograph." She spent the rest of the afternoon going very carefully through the rest of the archive while Juno drew beside her. By the time his grandmother collected him at 4 o'clock, she had found 3 more photographs. 2 more of her father and Kwon Seojun, spanning what appeared to be a decade of occasional meetings, and one of a hospital room. Her father standing at a bedside, a younger Korean man sitting in a chair beside him, both of them looking at the camera with a specific expression of people who are very tired and very relieved. On the back of the hospital room photograph, in different handwriting, not her father's. The man who stayed. 30 years I will not forget. She asked Madame Kwon about Kwon Seojun before she left. Phrased it as professional curiosity. Historical context for a Lagos expansion project. The old woman looked at her for a long, considering moment. "Seojun did business in Lagos in the 1980s and 1990s, Madame Kwon said. He had a crisis there once. A medical emergency, his heart. A man he barely knew stayed with him through 3 days in a Lagos hospital while his own family was trying to reach him. He never forgot it." He paused. "He said the man's name was Chukwemeka. He never learned his family name. He sent money for years, school fees I think, to an address in Lagos through a contact. He was very private about it." Chukwemeka Tunde, her father, who had worked the Apapa War for 12 years and had once mentioned very briefly, a sick Korean businessman, and 3 days he'd spent at the Lagos University teaching hospital because no one deserves to be alone when they might be dying, and her father had never been a man who could walk past a thing like that. She drove home. Sat in her car for 20 minutes. Her father had kept alive the grandfather of the man she now worked for. The man whose son had not yet left her thoughts since the night she'd whispered a warning over a silver tray. 30 years. A debt of 3 days in a hospital room, paid forward across a generation in the form of school fees neither she nor her family had ever known the source of, and a job offer made on the basis of a quality the man claimed he couldn't train, and a child who had told his father she was safe before either of them had given him any reason to. She sat in the car until the street lights came on. Then she went upstairs and called her mother in Chicago, and asked about her father, and let her mother talk for an hour without telling her any of it. That night, at 11:47 p.m., a message arrived on her personal phone from an unknown number that was nonetheless completely recognizable. My mother told me what you asked her this afternoon. We should speak. Are you free tomorrow morning? She looked at the message for a long time. Yes, she wrote back. She was not sure after she sent it, whether they were talking about the connection between their families or something else entirely. Chapter 7, Sunday morning. He came to her apartment. This was unusual. This was, she suspected, intentionally unusual. A deliberate step across the line that professional architecture normally drew between his world and the rest of the city. He arrived at 9 in the morning with 2 cups of coffee in the specific style she preferred and stood in her doorway with an expression that was as close to uncertain as she had ever seen his face get. She let him in. She had cleaned the apartment that morning with the specific thoroughness of someone trying not to think about why they were cleaning. He sat at her kitchen table. She sat across from him. The photographs were on the table between them. She had printed the ones she'd photographed on her phone, arranged them chronologically. He looked at them for a long time. I knew the story, he said. The sick businessman, the man who stayed. Grandfather told it every Chuseok. He never had a name or a face for the man. He touched the edge of the photograph of her father. He paid school fees for 3 children. He did not know their names. He knew only the address. There were 4 of us, Bola said. 3 girls and a boy. My youngest sister finished university 6 years ago. He looked up at her. He paid for all of your education, he said. Not a question. A realization landing. For the university years, she said. My parents thought it was a government scholarship. My mother never knew differently. I'm only understanding it now. The silence between them had a different quality than the silences at the office. Those had been professional silences, controlled, purposeful. This one was open in a way that neither of them had authorized. You saved my grandfather's life, he said. Indirectly. Through your father. And now I answer your emails, she said, which came out drier than she intended. Something happened to his face. The rarest thing. The fractional unwinding of all that control, a genuine unguarded laugh that lasted only 2 seconds but was completely, unexpectedly luminous. She looked at him laughing at her kitchen table and felt the 3 centimeters of professional distance collapse entirely for a moment before she pulled it back with both hands. What happens now? She said, because asking a direct question was the only way she knew to handle moments she couldn't categorize. He sobered. But not all the way. I don't know, he said. It was the most honest thing she had ever heard him say. I've been very careful for a long time. Careful about what I let matter. After Unjin, I decided certain things were. He stopped. Juno said you were safe. He said it the way he says things he's certain about. Your 8-year-old is more emotionally functional than most of the executives I've worked with, she said. The ghost of the laugh again. Briefer this time. He liked his mother very much. He studies the people around me the way she used to. He looked at the photographs. She would have found all of this improbable and inevitable in equal measure. Bola thought about that. I need you to understand, she said carefully, that I took this job because it was the right financial and professional decision. I would not want you to feel that the family history changes the dynamic between us in a way that wasn't. She stopped. She was losing the sentence. I know, he said. That's not what I'm concerned about. Then what are you concerned about? He looked at her directly. That I am not the easiest person to know, he said. That my life is complicated in ways that would become your complications by proximity. That Daehoon is still watching this company, which means he is watching everyone in it, which means he is watching you. He paused. That I am apparently very bad at pretending you are only my executive assistant. The kitchen was very quiet. I noticed, she said. They sat across from each other at her kitchen table. Coffee went cold. Neither of them moved for a long time. He left at noon. Nothing had been decided. Everything had shifted. Comment below. Do you think he was ready to say more? What would you have done in her position? The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. It came to her personal address. Not the office, her apartment in Mapogu, which was the first wrong thing. It was addressed in Korean, typed, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a photograph attached. The photograph was of her and Kwon Seojun. Taken, she assessed by the angle and distance, from a vehicle parked across the street from her building. Taken on Sunday morning at 9:04 a.m. based on the timestamp embedded in the image metadata, which she checked. The photograph showed him arriving at her front door with 2 coffee cups. Showed the door opening. It showed him entering. The text on the sheet said, in clean, formal Korean, *, the Kwon Group's executive conduct policy prohibits personal relationships between C-suite executives and direct reports. A formal complaint, if filed, would require suspension pending review. Consider whether your position is worth the risk. *. She read it twice, folded it, put it in her desk drawer. Then she went to the office and did her job for 11 hours. That evening she stayed late. When the floor emptied and the silver light off the Han River shifted from afternoon blue to night dark, she knocked on his open office door. He looked up. Read her face. Someone knows, she said. She put the envelope on his desk. He read it. His expression did not change. His stillness intensified in the way it did when something had reached its most dangerous point. Dae-hoon, he said. The approach is consistent with someone who wants leverage, not exposure, she said. If he wanted to harm you directly, he would have filed already or leaked to media. He's offering you a choice. Back off something, or I make this a problem. Back off the Lagos expansion, he said. Park Consulting has positioned to take the contract we're about to win. He set the paper down. He's escalating because the permit situation resolved without him being able to prevent it. He's using me as the pressure point, she said. Came out level. Inside something was not level at all. He looked at her. I can distance us professionally, he said. Restructure your reporting line. Put Chief of Staff Han Ji-hoon between us. It would neutralize the policy argument. She thought about this. Thought about Sunday morning in her kitchen. The laugh. The coffee going cold. Is that what you want to do? She said. The pause that followed had the weight of everything they had not said since Sunday. No, he said. Then we need another approach, she said. Dae-hoon is using a weapon that only works if we give him the target. If the conduct issue is neutralized, I would need to restructure your role, he said, thinking aloud. Move you to a parallel reporting structure as a regional affairs director. Equal authority, different chain. Removes the direct report issue. How long would that take? 2 weeks to process through HR. Then we have 2 weeks, she said, to stay exactly where we are and give him nothing he can use. He looked at her for a moment with the full weight of his attention. You are, he said slowly, the most extraordinary person I have hired in 15 years of running this company. She picked up the envelope from his desk. I'll shred this, she said. We don't acknowledge it. And I'll need you to CC Han Ji-hoon on every communication between us starting tomorrow morning so the paper trail looks textbook professional. Done. He paused. Bola. Name. First name. It was the first time. Yes. Thank you for not running, he said. She nodded. Went back to her office. Shredded the envelope. Stood at the Han River window for 3 minutes. Looking at nothing. Went home. He said her name. First name. Subscribe, we're not even at the hard part yet. The 14 days that followed were the most professional fortnight of Bola's career. Everything was CC'd, documented, and routed through Han Ji-hoon's oversight with the scrupulous tidiness of people who have been made suddenly aware that someone is watching. Their interactions contracted to the purely functional. Briefing notes, project updates, the bilateral morning summaries that had always been their most efficient working rhythm. She did not stay past 8. He did not come to her office doorway in the evenings. The first aid kit in her drawer went untouched. It was also, in its restrained way, one of the most layered fortnights of her emotional life. Because she was aware, with the clarity of someone who has been trained to read small signals, that the professional distance they were performing for Daehoon's benefit was not performing the way she'd expected. She had expected it to feel like a return to baseline. Instead it felt like holding still during a tremor. Not absence. Presence, carefully contained. On day 8 she came in at 6:45 to find her coffee already made. No note. No variation from the usual. Just the coffee exactly right at the exact time she needed it. On day 11, she submitted a draft press release about the Lagos expansion. He sent it back 30 minutes later with one edit. A single sentence added to the closing paragraph that included a phrase she had used in a private conversation on Sunday morning. Not quoted. Paraphrased, folded into corporate language. But there. She sat with that for longer than she needed to. He told me it was his mother's favorite dish, he said, looking at his bowl. Juno. He found an old receipt in a jacket pocket. She used to order delivery from a place near our old apartment when she was working late. He paused. He's been researching Jajangmyeon restaurants in Seoul. He told me this one had the best reviews for the taste that means home. She looked at her own bowl. 8 years old, she said. 8 years old, he agreed. There was something in his voice that was equal parts grief and gratitude, the specific frequency of a parent who is regularly undone by their child's precision. They talked about Lagos, about her family, about her father, and the way he had described the Busan businessmen he'd met at the port in the 80s. Formal and distrustful at first, then gradually, over weeks of proximity, something closer to collegial. She talked about her Yonsei years, the particular loneliness of being black and female in a Korean graduate program, and the professors who had been quietly extraordinary about it and the ones who had not been. He listened the way he absorbed briefings, completely, without interrupting, with a specific quality of attention that made you feel like the most important document in the room. He talked about Eunjin. Not extensively. He was not built for extensive, but enough. The way she had organized his calendar without being asked the first time they ever shared an office. The fact that she had been funnier than him, which she had known and used liberally. The way Juno had her laugh, which appeared rarely and without warning and was, each time, a small cardiac event. Bola listened. Did not offer consolation that wasn't asked for. Held space the way she had been holding space in this man's orbit for weeks. Steadily, without making it about herself. They were finishing their tea when her phone rang. Unknown number. Seoul area code. She looked at it. Looked at him. Answered. The voice was male. Agitated. Speaking in rapid Korean that she parsed in real time. Stunned. My name is Daehoon Park. We need to speak. Tonight. It is about my nephew. The restaurant noise continued around them. Juno, she said. Not a question. The word was out before the fear could fully form. Across the table, Kwon Seojun had gone very still. He's with his grandmother, Daehoon said. He's fine. For now. I need to speak to my brother-in-law, and I need you to be present because he'll listen to you in a way he won't listen to me. I'm not the threat here. I need you to understand that. But there is one. She met Kwon Seojun's eyes. He had heard the call. They were in a quiet corner and her volume had been steady. Where? She said. The address was a Hanok guest house in Bukshan, 20 minutes from where they sat. Kwon Seojun was already reaching for his jacket. The Bukshan Hanok guest house was the kind of place that existed between Seoul's centuries. Traditional curved roof architecture tucked between boutique galleries and artisanal coffee shops, the past and the present coexisting with the particular urban pragmatism of a city that had been rebuilt so many times it had stopped being sentimental about layers. The courtyard was lit with paper lanterns. Somewhere close, a hegium was being played. The smell of pine resin and night-blooming jasmine made the whole street feel like a held breath. Daehoon Park was waiting in the outer room. He was younger than she'd expected. Mid-40s, with a face that bore the specific erosion of years spent in organized anger. He looked at his brother-in-law with an expression she recognized. Not hatred, which is clean and navigable, but grief that has been weaponized for so long it has forgotten it was grief. Kwon Seojun looked at him with the same controlled stillness he brought to everything. But his hands at his sides were very slightly closed. "Dae-hoon," he said. That was all. "Seojun," Dae-hoon said. Then, with visible effort, he looked at Bola. "Thank you for coming. I need to explain something. Both of you need to hear it." ASAP. The paper lanterns threw soft, shifting light. The story that Dae-hoon told took 20 minutes. It began as these stories always do, somewhere a long time before anyone realized it had started. 4 years ago, when he had begun his campaign against the Kwon Group's expansion, he had accepted funding from a third party, an investment consortium with offshore registration that had approached him with what seemed like aligned interests. They wanted the Kwon Group's West African operations slowed. He wanted the same. They funded Park Consulting's counter-strategy generously and without conditions. The conditions had arrived 3 months ago. The consortium, which he had since identified too late, as a front for a logistics conglomerate with ambitions in the same African ports the Kwon Group was targeting, wanted more than market competition. They wanted the Kwon Group destabilized at the board level. They had identified Kwon Seojun's personal situation as the most efficient pressure point, and they had begun collecting intelligence that included, among other things, the surveillance of his executive assistant. "The envelope you received," Dae-hoon said to Bola, "was not from me. I sent one threatening letter, yes, in the early stage when I still thought this was about business competition. But the photograph, the metadata, that was them, not me." He looked at the table. "They have been in your building's security feed for 6 weeks. They are not interested in a conduct complaint. They want something that will force Seojun to step down or cooperate or stop. Or they take something that matters to him," Bola said. Dae-hoon looked at her. "I found out today that they ran a location track on Juno's school 2 weeks ago," he said. His voice had changed. The weaponized grief had gone out of it. What was left was just grief, clean and unstrategic. "He is my sister's son. Whatever I think of." He looked at Kwon Seojun. "He is Yunjin's son. I am not willing to be part of." He stopped. "I am not this. Whatever I became in the last 4 years, I am not this." Kwon Seojun sat across from his dead wife's brother in a lantern-lit hanok courtyard, and the silence between them was the length of 6 years of misplaced grief. Bola looked at both of them. "Juno is with his grandmother," she said. "What is the current risk level?" "The track was reconnaissance, not active," Dae-hoon said. "But they are impatient. The Lagos permits going through despite their interference accelerated their timeline." Kwon Seojun had his phone out. He dialed. Brief, precise instructions. "Madam Kwon and Juno to the secure family residence in Songbuk-gu. Private security detail tonight." He hung up. Looked at Dae-hoon. "The consortium name," he said. Dae-hoon gave it. "And the names of 3 individuals. And the location of the offshore account and the paper trail he had, belatedly, been careful enough to keep." It took Kwon Seojun 7 seconds to make a second call, this one to someone whose number was not in his main contacts, and issue instructions in a tone that made Bola understand, fully and finally, exactly what kind of power she had been in proximity to for the last 2 months. The consortium's Korean council received a legal notice before midnight. The Port Licensing Authority in Lagos received an inquiry that evening from the Ministry of Trade and Industry that would take 3 weeks to process and result in the consortium's pending application being reviewed for irregularities. Dae-hoon Park sat in the lantern-lit room and watched his brother-in-law dismantle 4 years of someone else's strategy in 11 minutes and thought about his sister, who had always said that the thing about Seojun was that he was slow to act and complete when he did. Bola thought about her father, who had stayed 3 days with a sick stranger in a Lagos hospital, and about Kwon Tae-soo, who had sent school fees to children he never named, and about the photograph on Sunday morning, and about the laugh at her kitchen table, and about 14 days of perfect professional restraint, and about a kiss in an office on a Friday evening that had been witnessed by exactly the right person. We're almost at the end. If you've made it here, you know this story. Tell me in the comments. What do you think Dae-hoon does next? They drove to the Songbuk-gu residence together. Kwon Seojun was on calls for most of the drive. Legal, corporate, a conversation with a government contact that she did not track closely because some rooms she was not yet invited into. She sat beside him in the back seat and watched Seoul move past the windows and thought about nothing in particular except that the city looked different when you were in it rather than looking at it from 43 floors above. Juno was awake when they arrived. He was supposed to be asleep. It was 10:30 at night and he had school the next morning, but he was sitting in the kitchen with his grandmother eating sweet rice cake and drawing, which was his response to disruption and had been since he was very small. He looked up when they came in. He looked at his father first, with the specific intensity of a child who is doing a rapid damage assessment. Then he looked at Bola. Then he looked back at his father. Then he said, in Korean, with the flat certainty of someone confirming a hypothesis, "Oh, it happened." Madame Kwon, who had apparently been informed of nothing, looked between the two adults with the raised eyebrow of a woman who has been watching people for 7 decades and has stopped being surprised by them. What happened? Juno asked. Not I told you so, he was past that. Genuine inquiry. We'll talk tomorrow, Kwon Seojun said. You always say that. And I always do. Juno considered this. Found it sufficient. Turned to Bola. Did you eat? Jajangmyeon, she said. Your recommendation. It was very good. His face did the thing that was his mother's laugh, brief and luminous. I know, he said. Then, with the democratic authority he brought to all important pronouncements, you should stay for tea. She looked at Kwon Seojun. He looked back at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not the controlled professional stillness, not the careful guarded openness of Sunday morning, but something quieter and more settled. The expression of a fixed point that has found, unexpectedly, that it is willing to move. You should stay for tea, he said. Madame Kwon put the kettle on without comment. The weeks that followed were not simple. They were not supposed to be simple. The consortium's activities became the subject of a joint investigation between the Korean Financial Services Commission and the Lagos state government. The latter moved faster than anyone expected, which Bola suspected had something to do with a phone call she made to her uncle's contact, who had not forgotten that she had been useful to him once. Dae-hoon Park's testimony was voluntary and meticulous. He had kept better records than he'd had any reason to keep, and Bola thought privately that on some level he had always known this day was coming, that there was a difference between grief weaponized and grief resolved, and he had been moving, however obliquely, toward the second for longer than he knew. Kwon Seojun and Dae-hoon Park had 3 conversations in the course of the investigation. She was not present for any of them. She knew they were happening because she had worked with Kwon Seojun long enough to read the quality of his silences. And after each conversation the particular silence that had been carrying 6 years of unaddressed grief was slightly lighter. Not absent. Lighter. Some things do not dissolve, they only stop being load-bearing. She flew to Lagos in November for 2 weeks to oversee the operational restructuring that the permit approval had made possible. Her mother met her for 3 days. She did not tell her about the photographs, the school fees, any of it. She had decided that some things had happened the way they were supposed to happen and did not require retroactive visibility to have been meaningful. Her mother cooked egusi soup and asked no questions about her job that were really about her life, which was how her mother always asked the questions that were really about her life. She video called Juno twice during the 2 weeks, because he called her first and she was not going to not answer. He reported on school, on a drawing he was working on for a project, on the fact that his father had started eating breakfast at home instead of at the office, which Juno believed was a sign of positive development, though he did not use those words. She called Kwon Seojun once. Professionally. Project update 40 minutes, clean and functional. He asked at the end how Lagos smelled. She thought about this. Like the ocean and burnt offerings and something frying, she said. Like home, but the version of home that made you leave and the version that made you want to come back. I've never been, he said. You'll need to, she said. When the Abuja office opens. I'll be there. Another pause. Good, he said. And then the pause had the quality she was learning to read. The quality of something not being said because it didn't need to be said yet, but not being absent either. Safe travels, Bola. She flew back on a Thursday. He was at the office when she arrived at 6:45 a.m. Her coffee was on her desk. He came back. He was there. Subscribe, you've earned the ending. The Kwon Group's West Africa expansion launch was held in Seoul and Lagos simultaneously. A first for the company, a deliberate signal of equal weight. In Seoul, the 44th floor hosted a reduced, intentional gathering. Board members, the Lagos operational team on screen, Han Ji-hoon who had prepared the press release with his usual precision, and Madame Kwon who had come, she said, because she was interested in developments. Juno came because it was a Saturday and he had been told by no one that he could not. He sat in his usual chair in Bola's office, which was now the Director of Regional Affairs office, and drew while the formal portion of the event proceeded in the adjacent boardroom. When the live feed from Lagos came on, the Abuja team waving, the Lagos operations director making a speech that was both too long and entirely appropriate, Juno watched it from the doorway. "Have you been there?" he asked Bola, who had come to stand beside him. "I grew up there," she said. "Lagos. Until I was 12. It looks loud," he said. He meant it as a compliment. She could tell. "It is," she said. "It is very loud. And it smells like 100 things at once, and the traffic will try to kill you, and someone is always selling something from a cart, and someone is always arguing about football. Do you miss it?" She thought about the goosey soup, the ocean, the burned offerings, the version of home that made you leave. "I carry it," she said. "That's different from missing it." Juno considered this with the seriousness he brought to things that mattered. "I carry my mom like that," he said. "She's not here but she's with me." He looked at the Lagos feed. "Appa does too. He's just quieter about it," she said. "Yeah." The boardroom door opened. Kwon Seojun emerged, having said what needed to be said to the people who needed to hear it, and walked toward them with a particular quality of motion that meant the formal part of his day was over, and whatever came next was his own. He looked at Juno first, the rapid assessment, the faint relief that is the specific frequency of a parent who has lost one person and has not stopped being aware of what loss feels like. Then he looked at Bola. She was standing in the doorway of her own office, in the silver late afternoon light of the Han River, with his son beside her, and she was not performing anything. She was not being professionally appropriate or carefully maintained or 3 centimeters of glass away. She was simply herself, which was, he had understood this for a while now, both the most formidable and the most quietly extraordinary thing he had ever been given access to. He came to stand beside her. The three of them watched Lagos on the screen. The noise, the color, the irreducible energy of a city that had survived everything thrown at it and built something specific from the rubble. "Dad," Juno said. Can we go to Lagos? You have to go for work anyway." Bola said she'd be there. Kwon Seojun looked at Bola. She looked back at him. 4 centimeters. The Han River behind them. A company they had built something in together. A child who had made a decision about her before either of them had the vocabulary for it. "Yes," Kwon Seojun said. "We can go." Juno made a small sound of satisfaction and went back to his drawing. The boardroom had emptied. The floor was quiet. Outside, Seoul was doing its evening thing. The river going silver, the lights coming on in sequence across the skyline, the city reorganizing itself into its night configuration. He reached quietly and took her hand. Not a declaration. Not a resolution. Not the end of anything. Beginning. A small, precise, deliberate choice. Made in full knowledge of the complications ahead, the Daehoon situation still resolving, the investigation ongoing, the logistics of 2 people in the same orbit when one of them carries grief like a stone and the other carries home like a wound. Made with eyes open, which is the only way a thing like this can be made. She let him. She held back. Then she turned her hand over and held his. The Han River went silver. Juno drew. The Lagos team waved from their screen in a city that smelled like the ocean and burnt offerings and something frying. This is where we leave them. Not with the noise of the thing being decided. With the quiet of it being chosen. If this story moved you, subscribe to Afro K Heartstrings. There are more of these. Share it with someone who needs a slow burn today. And tell me, what do you think happens the first morning in Lagos?